welcome to another episode of the IBC Guys. So I'm Dave. Mike's here with us. Tonight, we have the world's foremost expert in walleye fishing in Manitoba, Canada, joining us tonight, Mr. Tim Scheinder. Welcome, Tim. Did you know we were turning it from an IBC podcast into a fishing podcast?
It's funny because I talked to Mike a little while ago and told him that was my plan, is when you introduced me
I
to,
stole
to
your.
bring up this is three of the four probably most prolific walleye fishermen maybe in the world.
Yeah. The guy that had no idea, me, absolutely no idea what he was doing. I caught the biggest fish I've ever caught because my first time ever walleye fishing. We had a good time, but Tim outfished me, caught bigger fish, so that makes you the foremost expert. So
Oh man, you're very humble, Dave. I know that about you after spending some time with you, and I'm not sure that you didn't outfish me hands down.
okay. Well, that is not why. So if you're listening or watching, that is not why we're here tonight. But we did have a good time on our fishing trip. So we do have a good episode tonight. Tim is obviously joining us. He's going to be sharing his story, a little bit about his walk through IBC and what that's entailed. So I'm gonna kind of do the intro and then sit back and listen. So I'm excited to do that. Maybe less of Dave talking. Maybe there'll be our highest rated one. We'll see. But we do exist in IBC for three reasons. The IBC guys exist for three reasons. One is provide knowledge about IBC. We would love it if you, as the listener, would understand IBC and then make the decision for your family. Yay or nay, either way is good. We just want to get the information out there. Two, we want to provide practical, implementable examples. I think we'll get through that tonight here as we talk with Tim. He's kind of had his journey, so I'm excited to hear what his examples of IBC and how they've been implemented are. And then lastly, the goal is to get it out to as many people as we can. So get it out, share it with your grandma, share it with person at the gas station. I don't know, whomever. Mike's a prolific golfer now. He's working to be on the Senior PGA Tour. So Mike, go share it with the starter at the golf course. Your face right now. If you're on YouTube and you're watching, Mike's face says it all. If you're listening, I don't know how to describe it other than disdain, but Mike's been golfing and I'm really excited about it. So Mike, share it
I've
with the
been
starter
golfing
next
with my
time you're out there.
boys, but as you know, I hate the game and I only go because my boys are just like crazy into it now. So I go to hang out with them and I'm absolutely terrible. Um,
I don't think that's
that's
true.
not my thing. So one contrast real quickly here, since you guys brought up the Manitoba walleye fishing, Tim has walleye fished his entire life. I think that's probably his choice target fish, which is most everyone's in Minnesota. I didn't grow up here in Minnesota. I predominantly target largemouth bass, or if I'm in Canada, northern pike. It's my absolute favorite. So even though that Tim and myself have decades of experience
I don't know if I like where this is going.
fishing, I want to piggyback on what Tim just said. Is the three of us and my son Luke were in the boat. There is no question that, and he's a great fisherman as well. You were the least experienced fisherman by far, correct? I mean, I'm not out of school
I would
saying
think so.
that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you just haven't fished. Did you own a rod and reel?
Do I? No, I don't.
Yeah. See, I mean, Tim and I own like 50 of them. And you outfished us, hands down. You outfished us.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah,
I was just in the back
Tim,
eating my Uncrustable, pulling up
yeah,
what God made bite my hook. That's all I did.
you absolutely outfished us. So, but anyway, good
All
time.
right.
So yes, Tim is joining us today. Tim and I have been friends for, I'm going to say, like probably 25, 30 years. I know my oldest son, I believe, graduated with your oldest daughter, right? I think they graduated together 2010.
That sounds correct.
Yeah. So, and I think Drama, my oldest, that I affectionately call Drama, he's going to be 34 Wow. Even saying that, it's like crazy. Is that same thing with Hillary?
Yeah.
Is she?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, we've been friends for a long time, and we actually started our IBC journey for sure the same year. I think I started, and then I think I grabbed you, and we went to like a little seminar or whatever, and then you started, your IBC banking policy shortly thereafter that. So thought it'd be fun to have Dave on. Thought it'd be fun to have Dave on today. Thought it'd
Yay.
be fun to have Tim on with Dave. Yeah, just to give a little insight into his IBC story, his personal story, how he's used his policy, maybe some of the frustrations that you've had or had originally, questions. Everyone comes into this where they're just like, man, I don't know that I understand it totally. Everyone is at that. Everyone goes through that. So I think people like to relate to that. They hear someone else on like, oh, I got those same concerns or same questions or so anyway, like Dave, I am going to sit back and maybe interject.
Uh-oh. We lost
The
Mike.
floor is yours, buddy. Take it away. You lost me?
You glitched out there for a second, but we got the idea.
Oh, well, I was just saying that I am not going to say anything. You can take it away.
Right. And the benefit of you knowing me for 25 or 30 years is you know my personality. So if I see a squirrel and wander off, you make sure that you bring me back. So, I mean, Mike's right. I mean, we definitely have known each other that long. I think back to maybe 20, 25 years ago when my wife, Mary Claire, was doing daycare out of our home. And Mike's three youngest boys at certain times came through the door as babies and toddlers. So we definitely have known each other for a while. I think as far as IBC goes, Mike touched on it a little bit. We've both been around this stuff for about the same amount of time. I think maybe 8 or 9 years is pretty close. Since I've had a policy, we sort of learned our way through it. Mike was certainly the person that introduced me to it, though, at that point, I don't think Mike was in the game in terms of being an agent at that point. We both ended up with our policies through somebody else at that point. It's that long ago, but certainly sitting in the room he's in right now is where I learned the first things that I ever learned about IBC and was introduced to it. So, like I said, it's been 8, 9 years. My journey is a little bit different, I think, and you kind of alluded to that off the cuff there, or out of the gate, Dave, in terms of just getting the information out there and understanding there's a million different ways to use IBC, and mine is again different. And in order to, I think, walk you through that, I need to start at the beginning. So about 16 years ago, well, I'll go further back than that. 18, 19 years ago, my son Jackson was 4 or 5 years old in preschool, and we were seeing some things towards the end of that preschool year in terms of the way he walked, and he was having some issues at night, sleeping and night sweats and things like that. And it was a little bit alarming, and we ended up taking him to the doctor, and we worked through some things that the doctors felt like were bone infection type things at that point. Treated him for that for a few weeks, and he responded to those things. So that, we felt not great about that, but ultimately, the news we got further along the line was much worse. We learned that he had neuroblastoma, which is a childhood cancer that is obviously very rare, and as all childhood cancers are, but even more rare than some of the others that you hear about. Not a lot of people have heard about neuroblastoma. Interestingly enough, that exact disease is talked about in Nelson Nash's book, and I don't know that I could tell you 4 people that I know of, that I've ever had a personal relationship of any sort with, that have ever even heard of neuroblastoma. So that was interesting to me, and struck a chord there. But kind of back to that story, Jackson was diagnosed. before he went into kindergarten. So he had some surgery, went through chemotherapy for around a year before he was NED, no evidence of disease. So that first course of chemotherapy and radiation went very well. He was always upbeat, good spirits. He was that kid was something else. Anybody that ever knew him or came across him was always they were in for a treat. He never met a stranger. He could sit down with anybody from 2 years old to 82 years old and strike up a conversation. That there was many a time where we had to look for him at the swimming pool or wherever we were, and he would just be on a bench snuggled up, talking to somebody that he'd never met before. So, big personality. Mike, surely remembers that piece of it. But so we spent, after that first year of treatment, we spent another year living a pretty normal life. And then Jackson relapsed and relapsed in his brain, which was not where that disease is generally found. So we kind of searched the world, frankly, to find somebody that specialized in that type of care. We live here in Minnesota, close to Rochester, close to Mayo, where we got fantastic care throughout that first year, but it wasn't necessarily something that they were prepared to deal with once that relapse happened. So we at that point shipped out to New York City. Sloan Kettering out in New York City had some expertise in that specific situation where neuroblastoma relapsed in the brain specifically. So we spent some time out there, sometimes a month or more at a time. At that point, Mary Claire was doing daycare, I believe, at that point. So throughout this treatment, I kept my job. I was in law enforcement at that point, kept my job throughout, and just filled in where I could. Took obviously many days off to be with him through treatment. Mary Claire basically had to stop doing what she was doing and just basically be his caregiver through that time. So after those times out to Sloan Kettering, Jackson had some brain surgery. Things were again going very well, and he relapsed then again in other parts of his body. So we ended up going to Vermont at that point. Another specialist out there that was doing a study at that point, and we were able to buy some time. Frankly, is kind of how, looking back at it, what we're able to accomplish. And Jackson, I would say, had a really good quality of life in the times even when he was in treatment. He was always in good spirits. There were certainly times that were harder than others, but ultimately, he had a good few years there while he was also sick. I'm grateful for that. It wasn't always bad times, so that was a blessing. So kind of the unfortunate end of that story was in July of 2009. Jack got sick, wasn't feeling well, wasn't breathing the best. We took him to the hospital. He was admitted at that point, and unfortunately, after several days in the hospital, that continued to get worse. He had contracted a fungal lung infection that his body wasn't in any condition to fight, and we weren't able to bring him home. So he passed away August 3rd of 2009. So that's been 16 years now coming up. So throughout that, and that's it's an interesting way to start an IBC story, right? But in order to have a background in how what the necessity was for the policy and the thought process, you have to kind of know the background, and that's the background. Throughout that time, I talked about Mary Claire not having a job. We were spending money on flights and robbing Peter to pay Paul, as you can imagine. We had great family around us. We had a good community around us. We fundraisers and those types of things happen, but ultimately, like, it's a never ending expense, whether that's flights or hotels or making sure people have something to eat while we're on those trips, and medical expenses themselves. Those things just piled up. And at that point in our life, the girls, Hillary and Hannah, were were elementary age. Hannah was, and Hillary was in high school. So, I think from my point of view, we didn't want at that point to change their life. So we didn't really, I don't know how to explain it, but we didn't really take our foot off the gas. We continued to live the life that we had lived because they had sort of put their lives on hold in some respect for those few years, and didn't get the attention that Jack got because we just plain couldn't. It was a different life for them, and they're great kids, and they probably wouldn't have it any different. They knew what needed to happen then, and certainly we've talked about that over the last 16 years. But you live and learn, and like I said, me personally, I felt like we needed to continue to live, the life they were used to. So we didn't just cram on the brakes and start eating macaroni and cheese. We still, lived our life. So that coupled with the fact that we already had the debt, that debt was big, and I don't, I'm a pretty open book. I don't have, I think people can have shame around that stuff, and that's not where I'm at. Like at this point, I've learned a lot of things over the last 16 years, and thankfully IBC came into my life, and I think, kind of to start the idea of, how we got here and what I did with that policy. So there was kind of a fork in the road, really. I mean, you can either continue to pay those things off and maybe pay them the rest of your life if you're doing minimum payments, as you guys know, or we could find another way to do that. And thankfully, Mike and the IBC situation concept came into our life at the right time, and we were able to make a good decision on how to kind of peck away at that debt. And as I said, like there's a couple different ways to go about that. One is to write checks and let that money wander off, to other people, or just to start the banking system in your own family and recapture that money, even though it's for a less than desirable, reason, knowing that that money is going to be funneled back into your family's, um, you know, I forget the word that you always use, Dave, but ledger. If you keep that
Oh,
keep that
yeah.
money on the ledger, I know that I'm going to recoup all this money that I'm paying back these debts with over the next 20 years. So that's kind of, my IBC road. I mean, I don't know how far into the weeds you can get because it can get kind of confusing as far as how that exactly worked. But, suffice it to say that the policy was designed for for me to do kind of, I don't know if we're able to say names, but you can probably figure out where I might have picked up this idea of kind of pecking away at the biggest problem first, the highest interest rate first, like
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
um so yeah, but just that idea of like we got to figure out how to create a little bit of extra income, and that that's something that I've always been okay at. I don't know a time in my life where I haven't had at least two jobs. And I kind of, the that idea for me is kind of what drives me. I've always had some sort of, even though I've done, like I said, 25 years in law enforcement, I've always had some kind of sales or entrepreneurial type side gig, if you will. So I sold real estate for a number of years, but like I've always been pretty okay at creating more income. Like I'm kind of the reverse Parkinson's law guy. Like the park, and if we haven't talked about that on the podcast at all, Ben Parkinson's law basically says like the more money you make, the more the more you're able to get rid of. So you will find a way to create more expenses if you make more money. That's just the rule. So I'm kind of the reverse. If I want more stuff, I figure out how to make more money to pay for it.
Yeah.
So so back to that, that idea of pecking away. So create a little extra income, put that into a policy, and then started to use the funds in the policy to pick away at the biggest item on that list as far as debt. Once that was paid for, continue to make the same size payments on the next thing, and on down the line. And I won't tell you that life is perfect at this point, but boy, it's a lot different than it was 6 or 8 years ago. That's for sure. Some of that stuff was pretty significant. So, but it's been a tremendous tool for our family to be able to, walk away from and put that stuff behind us and, go on to live a more comfortable life without that stuff in it. So,
Can I kind of reflect back what I'm hearing, and you can tell me if what I'm hearing is correct in my articulation. But essentially, you told us your story, and I've heard that story, Tim, but it makes me smile and sad and feel all the emotions every time I hear it. So thank you for sharing it. But you guys your family had debt because of the situation that you all went through. But rather than simply, put your nose to the grindstone and pay off the debt, you ran the money you were going to pay off your debt with, you ran that money through a policy. So it, like to use that word, it stays in the ledger and it continues to earn you an internal rate of return, dividends, and interest. And then you use that money to go pay off your debt. Is that correct in what I'm hearing? My
yeah,
understanding? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, just being able to monetize, to steal. I've listened to every single one of your podcasts, Dave. I'm a huge fan, and actually listen to what you
Okay.
say. So, I mean, to be able to monetize that that money that's going out the door, even
Yeah.
if it's debt, is something it can be difficult to wrap your head around. I mean, we talk about like the cars or the vacations or the other things that you can potentially use an IBC policy for. When you talk about it in respect to paying off debt, it just for some reason it gives a little bit it's a little bit harder to wrap your head around.
Well, if you've listened, well, thank you for listening, because I think you're one of 7 people, my mom included, as being one of those other 7 that has listened to every episode. But
Oh, wait,
we
wait,
often
Dave,
say,
Dave, last week, hold on. Last week you said we had over 1 million.
no,
So
I
is
said
it
millions, and that was relative. So yes, but we do often say on the podcast that it's not a question, excuse me, of can IBC fit into what I'm doing? It's how. And it sounds like in your story, Tim, debt was how IBC fit in. And it's absolutely the money you're spending anyway. Let's monetize it. And I've shared on the podcast, what is your rate of return on your groceries? And that's one of my favorite questions. Mike does it with cars. Most people look at us like we have 3 heads because you do not get a rate of return. But I think the same to your point can be said about debt. Like, what a asinine question. What's my rate of return on paying off my debt? But with these policies, you absolutely can do that because you're running it through the cash flow system. So it's really cool to hear you articulate that. And not only are you throwing it out there as an idea, but you've lived it, which I think is inspiring, to be quite truthful.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, what a what perfect timing, what a blessing to be around people that are educated on this subject, or else I was literally just going to pay that debt off the same way everybody else does, and watch that money fly out of our life.
Yeah. So Mike introduced you to this, right? Would you say that Mike's like the godfather of IBC? Would you say that?
Without a doubt. Yeah.
I
I
know.
didn't I didn't
See?
realize anybody else knew about it, to be honest.
So my point is,
I thought he invented it for a period of time.
I know. So Mike hates that term. Nelson Nash, I would give it to Mike, is the godfather. But then Mike's like Godfather Part 2. So we'll call it that. But yeah, he's been instrumental in my education, same as yours. So really, if you're listening and you want to know about IBC, you need to bombard Mike's email. Hey, hook me up. Give me that knowledge. Let's have a conversation. So Mike's been giving me the good faces tonight. I love it. Mike, maybe having Tim on is what draws out all the emotion from Mike Stevens. But Mike, I've been doing all the talking. What do you want to add to Tim's story? You certainly have things you can add, not to speak for Tim, but you've known him for a long time. So what's your perspective on all this?
Yeah, well, I think it speaks to the fact that we get questions all the time on, well, can I use it for this? Can I use it for that? Obviously, in Tim's situation, or say paying taxes, something that those situations where you don't want to pay that money, versus like, well, buying a truck. Well, I want the truck, or I want a vacation, or I'm having a wedding, or I'm buying property, or, those things that you want to spend the money on. But then there's things that, that money is leaving your family. Like Tim said, that money, he's writing that check and it's leaving his family forever. But the infinite banking concept just creates a vehicle, a cash flow system that allows you to recover that money over time. Yes, it's several years, but that money is eventually all going to come back to your family. So, yeah, just another example of um, how it can benefit everyone. I think, Dave, you say all the time, it's not if IBC can help you, it's how, what your individual situation is. And I think Tim laid that out perfectly.
Yeah. And Tim, we don't have tons of time, but is there, you talk with people quite a bit about IBC because I mean, you and I have had conversations outside of this podcast here, so I know that's the case. When you talk about it, are there some things that you wish you had known, or how do you describe it to people that maybe we don't do as good a job on the podcast, or maybe you can say it in a different way? What comes to mind when you talk to people about IBC?
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the same concepts that you guys talk about, week after week are the questions or are confusing pieces that do come up. I'm just thinking about a conversation that happened not even with me, but next to me a couple of days ago, where somebody that I respect a great deal in terms of being disciplined. That's one thing that you sort of need to be in order to make IBC work. Is you need to be disciplined with money. You need to understand the concepts that we're talking about on a certain level, and be able to, stick to that plan. And in this conversation, like I said, this person I respect a great deal, very disciplined. They do, not only some qualified plan stuff, but they also have, other accounts that they have for vacations and things like that are making them money. And I think there's levels to people's education around things. But the thing that stuck out to me was this person that is very good with money brought up that they had spoken to the person that gives them advice on these types of things, and wanted to um, he wasn't escrowing his homeowner's insurance or his property taxes, that type of thing, and had wanted to kind of figure out a way to put that into those accounts, and was given advice like, listen, they're just not in there long enough, to make a difference. You're okay just to kind of, pay those as they come, sort of thing. And you can imagine, I'm sitting there quietly
Yeah,
and,
your ears perked up. Yeah.
holding onto the table, trying not to freak out, because I'm like, ooh, you're like a third grader in the back of the class with the answer and nobody else knows it. And you're like, me, pick me. We know how to do that. Like, that's something that's very simple. And I say that's very simple while I also was at Mike and Tanya's house over the weekend playing with that puppy, and I'll throw that in there. And and I literally was like, wait a second, this, somebody that's been around this stuff for 8 or 9 years. I was like, hey, Mike, if I wanted to do that, like, if, something glitched out in my mind, like, wait a second, how would I actually even design that policy? And then we talk through it, and ultimately you get to a spot where you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Even this far in, there are certain situations and things that you're like, wait a second. So I guess that's just proof positive that you don't have to be an expert, and I don't know that anybody ever really will fully know everything that's possible, but it really, like we've talked about so many times, like, there's a place for this in everybody's life. And I think the thing that I think about the most looking back is, I wish my policy was bigger, and I wish I would have known about this 20 years earlier. Like,
Yeah.
that's the biggest
Never heard
advantage.
that before.
What's that? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I wish I was your age, Dave.
Every single
Oh,
client I've talked to, I wish I would have got a bigger policy. I wish I would have started earlier. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
it's
we don't hear a lot of people regretting getting the IBC policy running. I have not experienced that. Mike's been doing this for like 1,000 years. He's not had that I know of. But let me jump back, and this is meant to be an encouraging question to the people listening and watching, Tim. I've shared in my story. It took me about a year, my wife and I, about a year, to wrap our minds around this concept enough to jump in. And then once we did and started working with it, get our hands on it. I mean, we couldn't get enough, and we just got policies. Can you give us a time frame? Like, how long did it take you to feel comfortable? And I know you maybe had it expedited a little bit with the story you just provided, but what's a time frame in your story that it took you to get to the point where you were ready to go?
Oh man, I would say maybe 6 months, kind of to from like, first hearing of the concept whatsoever to going through sort of how things worked and some other concepts. And we were kind of educated in a similar way. Some of the exercises that you guys have used on some of the first few episodes of this podcast were the things that we were learning, back then, and just understanding like, money that's borrowed versus money that's in an account, and whether, if you're going to take that out. And I'm struggling to remember exactly how you guys illustrated that, but I think you probably know what I mean. Like,
Sure.
just the understanding of financial literacy around, those people that think like, gosh, I'm going to pay cash for everything because cash is king. That's how, I'm not going to be in debt. And then realizing like what that really costs to take money out of, any account that it's making money in versus, is there a place for financing, and realizing, time value of money in both situations, and kind of learning that. So those concepts were also the things that we were sort of learning at that time. So it was a kind of a bigger picture than just, the basics of IBC at that point. But I think that's realistic that, 6 months later, I had a pretty good grasp on what I wanted and needed to do, and we put the plan in place and never looked back.
But again, my hope is it's an encouragement to those listening. It takes time, and we've mentioned that several times. In fact, maybe you put in perspective, we've not even done 6 months worth of podcasting. So if you are out there and have listened to every single episode, you shouldn't be there yet. I mean, mine, we were a year. I'm a slow learner. We played a game on the way to Manitoba, green glass door. Dave, this guy was the slowest to figure it out. Tim had it lickety split, so maybe that's the difference between 6 months and a year. So be more Timish than Davish, but at the same time, be encouraged that it does. It takes some study, it takes some thought, it takes some just experience and listening and talking with people. So we don't have tons of time, but I do want to encourage people to email. We can expedite that process if you want to call in, if you want to email us, we'd be happy to chat with you. So I'll throw that in there before we end up. We only got a couple minutes left. Tim, is there anything for the good of the cause that you want to say to the people that are listening or the people watching?
I think nothing's more important than, like, if this is something that you're even a little bit interested in, please reach out to these guys and get a conversation started. And if I could, you guys can certainly direct folks to me if they have a specific question that may be around that, the way I use the policy or anything like that. I'm happy to be a resource in that way. But like, realistically, the best advice I can give is start the conversation. I would encourage anybody to, pick up the Becoming Your Own Banker book of Nelson Nash's. I mean, that's kind of the jumping off point for all of us. I've read that book, I think, 3 times all the way through, and you pick up something new every time. These concepts they're not necessarily hard. They're just outside the box. They're just not what, your parents and your friends probably have taught you. It's just I look at it as just it's a better way. It's the next level. It's a way to, monetize the things that you're running in and out of your checkbook every single day. So, my encouragement would be start a conversation. And if it's not for you at the end of that conversation, that's okay with these guys. It's okay with me.
All right, Mike, we got to end on that, man. I don't know if that could have been stated any better. So I'll ask you if you have anything for the good of the cause, but I don't know if you can top that.
I can't top that.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank you, Tim. Really genuinely appreciate you being on. And my hope is that we've invited you back to do a couple other episodes. My hope is that we can make that happen, come to fruition, because you have been working with this for a while. And I think to hear the same thing different ways from different people really resonates with people that listen and watch. So I'm excited about that coming up. But thank you again for sharing your story. And I don't know, like I said, makes me feel all the emotions, but also for sharing your experience with IBC, for not only Mike and I, but the people listening. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah,
If you
my
do
pleasure,
want to get
Dave.
in contact, 507-205-2284. My email is dave@familybankingsolutions.com. Mike's is mike@familysolutions.com. I hate to break it to you, but if you want to get a hold of Tim, and his offer is genuine, knowing Tim, you want to talk with him, he'll talk with you. But sadly, you have to go through Mike and I. So I hate to break it to you. You got to email one of us or call us if you want to get in touch with Tim, which I completely understand if you want to talk to him too. First, I mean, but again, got to go through the gatekeepers here. So, gentlemen, I appreciate it. It's been fun. It's always good to see your faces on the screen. And if you're listening, thank you for joining too, and we'll catch you on the next one.